how you got into Scientology as a young person. Did you walk into a Scientology center? How did that work for you?
Yeah, I basically walked into a Scientology center at the very beginning. I was actually seeking some help and answers on how I might help my brother, who was currently locked up at Dammasch State Mental Hospital in Oregon. And he was heavily sedated, and I had spoke with the psychiatrist there, and they really weren't talking about any type of cure. They were talking about keeping him under control, and I was kind of afraid he was going to wind up living the rest of his life in the back ward. So I was actually seeking some tools and some answers on how I might be able to be of assistance to him, and struck up a conversation with a street disseminator, a person who goes out on the street to talk about Scientology to people, and discussed, what I was trying to resolve. And I had decided that maybe their basic communication course might help me be able to confront that situation better and be more effective at it.
And the idea in Scientology that the Scientology being against psychotropic drugs, was that, and psychiatry in general, that was resonating with you as well?
I had no idea about them being against psychiatric drugs or anything like that. I mean, I literally went there and learned for myself what was going on. My brother was very close and dear to me, and he had some schizophrenic problems where he'd rapidly roller coaster and as a person, and he'd have trouble with alcohol, and he'd wind up getting in a lot of barroom brawls and not being subdued by the cops. He'd wind up in the mental ward. But what I found when I went to go see him was that he was literally on, at the time, the stelazine and the thorazine, which are the real heavy-duty psychiatric drugs, which they even refer internally as the chemical straitjackets. And he was literally in a catatonic state. I mean, this was my own observation. I knew nothing about what Scientology thought about mental health or anything. Literally, step one was to try to increase my own ability to confront another person and to be able to communicate better, because it was very difficult for me to communicate with him and with the administrators and everything else in that state. I then picked up Dianetics, and even in Dianetics, there's not this vehement rejection of psychiatry and psychology. Hubbard initially was saying the only reason that they don't do any good is because they don't have the technology or the methodology or the answers to do anything with anybody. So that was my initial contact with it.
Can you give us a rundown of your rise through Scientology? What different posts you held, and from there?
All right. Well, in January of 1978, I began in the C organization, which is the million-year, billion-year contract, a lifetime commitment and more. And I went to Los Angeles. I was on a project to do purchasing for the renovations of the Cedars of Lebanon Hospital complex, which is a whole full block of Scientology service organizations. I did that for about, 9 months or something like that. And then shortly after that, I went on to the winter headquarters, which was the name of the base out at La Quinta, out in the desert, where Hubbard was, where there was a group of maybe 150 people that were putting together what they called a cinematography organization to film dissemination films and instructional films.
And this is L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology?
Correct.
Right, okay. Okay. And so did you meet Mr. Hubbard?
No, I never did meet him.
Okay.
He was just leaving there when I got there. In fact, one of my first, he was originally going to leave temporarily, and one of my first jobs was to help renovate his home there, because it was anticipated that he would return, but he never did return.
Okay. And what did you do after that?
And then after that, I went into what was called L. Ron Hubbard External Communications, and we handled all the communication relays between L. Ron Hubbard and the rest of the church.
Okay. And what time period are we talking about now?
This is like 1979.
Okay.
Yeah, 79 and 80.
Okay.
I did that for about 2 years.
All right. And then after that?
And then after that, and in 1981, I went on to this, what was called the Special Project, which was a small group headed by David MIscavige. He was actually called the operator, so he, everybody from the unit answered to him, and there was 4 other people in it. And our job was to find out and really investigate and get to the bottom of why there were so many lawsuits naming L. Ron Hubbard the founder of Scientology, and come up with a solution as to how to get rid of those lawsuits, because he was getting on in years, and the idea was he wanted to come back to what is now called the international headquarters, or the INT base, in just outside of San Jacinto, California, where films dissemination and educational are made, and he wanted to get those films done and get them done. So our job was to try to get rid of all these lawsuits that were outstanding against him, so that he could come back there harassment-free and live out his days working on what he wanted to work on.
Okay. Okay. And how long were you in this position?
Well, I guess I was on it for the rest of my career in a way. I mean, there was different permutations of it. It was first called the Special Project, then it was called the Special Unit, and then it was called, then we established the Office of Special Affairs to replace the Guardian's office. And then I was at Author Services, which was L. Ron Hubbard's personal literary agency, handled all his personal business, and I was a legal executive there. But again, I was still working on clearing away anything that might embroil L. Ron Hubbard in legal matters or external-facing matters, all the way up. That's all the way up through '86 now. So this is a five-year period through there.
Okay. And when you first started this post, this is when you first encountered David MIscavige?
1981, June of 1980. Well, I actually knew him earlier casually, but not first time I ever worked with him.
I see. Okay. All right. And so thereafter, tell us about, there's some highlights of your career that we've talked about where you did some major things for Scientology. Can you talk about that, I guess the early 1990s when there were problems with the IRS?
Well, yes, the IRS was really an extension of this all-clear concept of getting rid of all illegal matters or external-facing matters that are hindering Scientology. It was tied in with about a couple of dozen lawsuits that were brought around the country naming L. Ron Hubbard. Some grand juries that were outstanding from the old Guardian's office activity there was one in Tampa, one in D.C., and I believe one in New York that were still trying to get indictments against Mr. Hubbard. Even after the Guardian's office people had been indicted and convicted in Washington. So all these things sort of tied together with one another. And it was always perceived that the IRS was the most important thing to handle, because if you have tax exemption, you have a religious recognition, you're treated differently in courts. There's some level of almost immunity, First Amendment immunity, to a lot of the type of allegations that were being made. So the IRS was the big thing to handle. I mean, when I was involved in that in the late 80s, we had calculated that the IRS, considered that the churches had upward of $1 billion in liability, and the total reserves of the church were a fraction of that, maybe in the 200 million range. So literally, they could have wiped Scientology out 5 times. So between having got rid of a lot of the civil suits in the mid-'80s and '93, when we ultimately got exemption, I mean, the number one mission was to obtain tax exemption from the IRS, and that was the bulk of what my attention was on and what I worked on.
And you were right at the center of the IRS effort, right? You worked with Mr. MIscavige. Can you tell us about that, with the IRS people? Yeah,
okay, well, in the late 80s and going into the early 90s, I was tasked with implementing strategies to try to overwhelm the IRS like they were attempting to overwhelm us. I mean, it was sort of like a fight fire with fire situation. We brought Freedom of Information Act lawsuits in numerous different jurisdictions. We had legal litigation strategies to counteract their strategies to deny certain churches exemption and that sort of thing. But it was a huge battlefield that was nationwide. There was literally 2,700 suits at one point, and I was very much involved in coordinating and coming up with strategies and then executing a lot of that between the late 80s and the early 90s. And then in late 91, Dave MIscavige and myself were in Washington, and MIscavige kept bringing up with the attorneys, why don't we just sit down with the commissioner and get this thing straightened out, because there's so much, there's so much insanity that goes on when you have this kind of institutional fight going on for so long. You're fighting over issues that are anachronistic in a lot of cases. They're not even, we're fighting over, for example, we were fighting over the years 70 through 72. That's as far as the litigation had reached. And here we are 20 years later in 1991. So he kept pressing that, why don't we just go straight to the top and talk to the commissioner. And we had a lot of expensive attorneys from D.C. and Washington who were, attempting at different levels to start negotiations. And that went in fits and starts. And one day we were in Washington, and finally Dave said to one of the attorneys there, he said, we're going to just go straight down there and go see Fred. And of course, the attorney was laughing. And he turned to me and he said, right? And I said, yeah. And then, they all thought it was a joke. And we, right afterwards, we just got up from lunch, got in a cab, and went straight down there and opened the door. Opened the door to get negotiations going. We didn't get in a meeting. As has been reported, we didn't just walk into the commissioner's office. We walked in and said we'd like to bury the hatchet. A couple of assistants of the commissioner came down and saw us, took all our information, said they'd get back to us, and they did. I think it was even later that day, set up a meeting with the commissioner for the following week.
This is Fred Goldberg?
Yeah, Fred Goldberg.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And that began a process after that?
That began a process. I mean, all Fred Goldberg did was open up the door to creating a forum where we could make a case for exemption. And what he did that was so positive and unique is he tried to bring somebody in who was fresh, who knew exempt organizations but didn't have a long history with Scientology. Because there were some real haters, some real Scientology haters within that, had an attitude of no matter what you said, they were going to deny the exemption. And so all he did was give us the ability to meet with a team that didn't really have a long track record on this, yet knew exempt organizations, knew what the requirements were, and said, okay, prove you're exempt. And then that process went on for at least 2 years. I mean, we were literally commuting to Washington, D.C. almost every week. It was Monday or Sunday, out to D.C., see the IRS, present answers to their set of questions, get another set of questions, go back to L.A., get the information together, get someone would entail audits of certain units or this sort of thing. You'd have to account for different things. Mm-hmm. In operations, in finances, and that sort of thing. Boom, next Sunday, back on a plane, back to D.C., another meeting. That went for 2 years.
And this process is you and Mr. MIscavige primarily?
Rimarily. Mm-hmm. At one point, attorneys came in, started coming with us. We really started getting more technical audit issues. Mike Rinder attended several of the meetings. Heber Jensch attended several of the meetings. And then we would sometimes bring in experts on different fields, like Rick Moxon came into one on FOIA. Bill Walsh was another FOIA attorney who came in and attended 1 or 2 meetings. But primarily, the two constants from the beginning to the end were Dave and myself.
Why didn't anyone jump in and try to stop this?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to explain that. I mean, on the one hand, I think you've got a bit of that phenomena where, you know, you got the famous case of the woman in Brooklyn who got stabbed in front of 38 witnesses and none of them called the cops. There's a famous 1964 case that people always talk about how people are basically irresponsible or whatever you want to call it. A recent book came out called Tipping Point, which studied that whole thing. They went out and interviewed every one of those 38 people and found out it wasn't that nobody called despite 38 people seeing it. It was precisely because 38 people saw it that nobody called. Because everybody else thought if it's happening in broad daylight in front of 38 people, there must be some reason for it. Or they thought somebody else is going to do something about it. Okay, there's that part of it. The other part of it is a combination where you have such a level of control put in with this guy and fear, and where nobody can defy him. Because if they do, you know, he's so vengeful, you could be persona non grata for the next 12 years if you ever do anything that indicates that you have an intention that even slightly is in disagreement with any of his intentions. I don't know how to explain it to you. It's the way it's operated. And, you know, working in that area for so many years, you realize that, you know, you could be, you know, the head of the International Watchdog Committee one day, and if you so much as sneezed wrong, he'd have you busting rocks for the next 12 years. And so there was that fear factor. Interestingly, you say, how could somebody hold people in a spell like that? One of the ways he's done it is to identify himself successfully, at least internally, and I think with the public of Scientology, that he is somehow the anointed one, appointed by L. Ron Hubbard to carry forward the legacy. It's a complete and utter 100% bald-faced lie. But he successfully orchestrated it, and they believe it. And when they believe that, they're willing to do almost anything.
Okay. So because people don't fight back, they just sit there and take it? They just cower and just accept the attacks?
Yeah. I mean, that's not the way I dealt with it. Mm-hmm. Okay. I defended myself. And of course, when I defended myself, he only laid gloves on me twice. Both times he hit me in the midsection and I flexed my abs and he ended up hurting his hand and screaming at the top of his lungs to his wife, "Do you see that, Shelley? He's trying to kill me. Look at him. He's clenched. He wants to kill me. He's evil. Do you see?" And he's on and on and on and on, and then he blows out of the room. Okay. But he would always do that in private with me. He never did that in front of other people.
What would...
But to answer your question, yes, they take it.
They take it?
They take it.
They just cower on the floor? Just
They get in the fetal position. Mark Yeager, I've seen him in the fetal position numerous times, you know, just covering up to cover his vital parts, because the guy will start kicking on him, throwing big volumes at him. You know,
books?
Like, yeah, the big green volumes, or the red volumes. Boom! Throwing water bottles, you know, 16-ounce water. He throws water bottles at women. Now, I've never seen him go out, literally strike with his hand a woman, but I've seen him throw water bottles at women.
Filled with water?
Filled with water.
Mm-hmm. And the volumes you were talking about, the size of what, like an encyclopedia or a
like an
Bible
Encyclopedia Britannica, like that thick,
mm-hmm.
you know, that big.
Mm-hmm. Did anyone ever have to be treated medically for this? For these beatings?
I don't know. I bet you Rinder had to go to a chiropractor. I mean, he messed his neck up pretty good.
Would anyone have occasion to report this to the authorities? Why did that ever happen?
Well, that's kind of requires a longer answer, I guess. It's sort of that whole thing of you're programmed into this existence and this mindset, you know, and when you leave it, it takes a while to decompress, you know, and get your bearings straight. Like, it took me like 4 years. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's probably a short runway for a guy who's been in for 27 years. You understand what I'm saying? I've talked to people now that I've been out on the internet. I mean, I've got people coming out of the woodwork contacting me who I don't even remember. I mean, they were tight 20 years ago, and now they're talking for the first time, you know? So you kind of learn to pent it up within you. So the funny thing is, I don't think that by the time anybody kind of decompresses, goes through the decompression cycle and gets their life back together, I think the statute of limitations are shot. Quite frankly, I think that's why this guy hasn't been serving time for A and B, assault and battery.
Do everyday Scientologists practicing around the world know about this?
Oh, absolutely not. They have no clue.
What would they think, do you think, if they knew about this?
I don't know. We'll see what they think. They're about to find out about it. We'll see what they think. I mean, he really stage manages his public relations with these people. Tom, he goes this far. In Clearwater, in his special apartment, he's got a tanning table. So the day before the event, he looks nice, healthy, clean. He's got a biographer for L. Ron Hubbard, who's supposed to be doing the L. Ron Hubbard biography. He's been on the payroll for 15 years to get the biography done. He'll never get it done because he's writing Dave's speeches for the 5-6 events a year that he does. The whole world's about this stage-managed public persona image that he puts out to the public Scientologists. But while he's doing the salon table, he's got Rinder and Yeager and Guillaume and these people who are going to be co-speakers with him staying up night after night after night before the events, constantly changing their speeches so they're going to fumble when they get to them, so that when he gets out there, he looks like a movie star compared to these guys that are up there with him. It's pretty twisted.
David Miscavige use information against people that was gained in a Scientology confessional?
David Miscavige specialized in doing that. He loved doing that. He did it all the time.
And as a precursor, could you describe what a confessional scenario was like in Scientology?
Okay, a confessional in Scientology, it's like an auditing session. You've got an auditor or a confessor, and you've got a pre-clear or a person who's being counseled. And it's just like an auditing session where you ask the guy a question about his mind or his time track, and he goes back in his mind and finds an answer and gives it to you. Except in a confessional, it has to do with transgressions that you've committed. It's a specialized form of auditing. Okay, and you ask the guy, have you stolen anything? Boom, reads on the meter. And then you look at the guy and you ask him to answer the question, and you get the guy to confess. Okay. And it works like auditing too, because when you confess something, it's a very cathartic experience. You get this floating needle phenomenon on the E-meter, which indicates that the guy's space is in a good place, his personal, spiritual space. And you can see it in the guy. There's a lot of relief, color in the face, the whole thing. That's basically a confessional in Scientology. There's a little bit of an aberration or hitch connected with it, because sometime in the 60s, when the AMA and the BMA and the FDA and the CIA and the FBI and everybody and their brother alphabet soup was after L. Ron Hubbard, he got a little bit worried about security within the organization, and he started this thing which he called security checks. So it was using confessionals as a security tool to make sure that people around you could be trusted, you see? And that really kind of threw a bit of a wrench in the works, because now it's no longer solely for the purpose of the benefit of the person being receiving the confessional. It's actually for the benefit of the organization, to give it more comfort that it's not being infiltrated, or we don't have people that are untrustworthy around you. So it's one of those dichotomies in Scientology,
And this is
the confessional is a beautiful thing. The security check ain't necessarily such a beautiful thing, depending on the context. It's open for abuse, because when the concept of security check came up, and since it's more of a group consideration, it became permissible to report the results of the things that came up or were confessed to the authorities within the church, so that they could then take whatever action was required, either with that individual from an ethics perspective, or organization that they could use that information to evaluate situations or whatever. So that's the confessional and the security check. David MIscavige took full and complete advantage of the security check aspect and was obsessed with finding out any details he could about people. And, you know, from one perspective, it put me in a really strange position, because one of the greatest joys I have is giving a confessional to somebody, because they get a tremendous amount of gain out of it. But when you start seeing that, you know, the fruits of that, you know, you see this guy, this man or this woman, you know, walk out of there feeling 10 feet high, and then you go down to a conference 2 hours later, and MIscavige is there at the head of the table, you know, talking about this guy or this girl's sexual peccadillos that came up in the security check. You know, it really becomes sort of gut-wrenching, and you know, you conflicted. You become conflicted.
So he shared the private information that was shared in a security check. He shared that with other people?
Right.
How many other people, like around a conference table?
Around a conference table with 40 people, all event management. They'd have these conferences all the time. You know, everybody have to get at attention and wait for MIscavige to show up. He'd show up, sit down at the end of the table. Everybody else would sit down, and then, you know, he'd give his spiel on whatever it was about. Many, many times, he'd just sit there and denigrate people for the things that they confessed to doing.
Now you said,
which incidentally, and I say, you know, I always tell you there's you know, a big difference between L. Ron Hubbard and Dave MIscavige, because he continually tries to position himself as the second coming. Okay, and this is the perfect example of where you know, those things couldn't be further departures, because he reveled in that. He reveled in bringing people down with that information, when the whole purpose of it is to get the guy vent and bring him up. You see how it sabotages the whole process.
You said it was okay to use that security check information, but was that done in a quiet sort of one-on-one scenario?
That's how it was intended. Okay. And that happens all the time. That happens over at Flag day in and day out, even if you're a public. Mm-hmm. Like these people on OT7, they come in every 6 months and they get a little security check. Mm-hmm. Not a big deal. But things will come up. You know, they'll have some peccadillos, they'll have some ethics situation. Well, what'll happen is they'll get routed to go see the ethics officer, and it'll be one-on-one with the ethics officer, and I'll go, hey, I see you've been shoplifting, or I see you know, you've been cheating your partner, or whatever. You know, how are we going to address this? You know, this needs to be addressed, because if you continue with this kind of activity and you don't make good for it, you're never going to get any gain out of any of this. But you're right, it's in a one-to-one, let's get you to sort it out type of thing. It's not, they don't have an assembly over at the ballroom at the Fort Harrison, you know, at graduation night and announce these guys' transgressions. But that's literally what happens up at INT. I mean, he's literally had base briefings where all 900 or 700 staff are down in that big dining hall down there, and he'll get up there and just start spewing about people's confessions that they disclosed, you know, to denigrate them in front of everybody.
In your mind, that's an abuse of that practice?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We talked about the violence, we've talked about this behavior. How do you think all this is affecting the Church of Scientology?
I got to tell you, I really think that the Titanic is hitting the iceberg. I mean, it's not only that, there's a number of other factors. There's the fact that while all this sort of sadism is being played out by MIscavige up at INT, it's been years since he's allowed any form of management to actually take place. Like, nothing emanates, no evaluations, no strategies, no major programs emanates out of that place beyond his own pet programs. And this has been going on for years and years. It went on for 4, 5, 6 years before I left. It was one of the reasons why I left. It's just nothing but destructivity. And I've subsequently learned from people who have left since that it's gotten even worse. I mean, nothing emanates out of that place. And so you've got archaic finance systems. You've got finance systems in place at the organizations all across the United States where it's not viable for a person to be a staff member. It's unaffordable to move up the Scientology bridge through auditing or training because the prices are too exorbitant and they don't match what would be affordable to a regular working person, which Hubbard had worked out a whole formula for. He won't let any of these things happen. So in essence, you've got the doors soldered shut to the organizations. And in effect, you have a cult being created because MIscavige just keeps coming up with new gimmick after new gimmick to cannibalize off the same public. And it's gotten pretty extreme. I'll tell you how extreme it is. I mean, here I am putting a little one-page web page up, offering my help. Tom, I'm hearing from people that are on lines at Flag now. I mean, that's unheard of 10 years ago. I know what's going on over there.
What are the people, those people, these are parishioners, right?
Yeah.
What are they saying?
Things like, it's now standard practice that if you ever get sent to ethics, like one of these OT7 people who are out doing their solo auditing, and they come into Flag for their 6 months check, and something comes up like they have some ethics problem, they get to the ethics officer, and it's standard operating procedure. We need you to buy another one of these book packages. They've already bought the new books, $3,000 for a set, right? Well, now you got to buy another one as amends and send it to a library. It's just like they keep going back to the well again and again and again with the same people.
But on the surface, do you see? I mean, the church just spent $40 million on its the Fort Harrison Hotel. You see a lot of money being spent. That seems to go at odds with what you're saying, that things are going downhill.
Oh, they've got so much stashed away, and like I said, he's going back to the well again and again and again with the same people. They get him to make donations for no exchange. They get him to make donations for no service. Donate for this building campaign. Donate for this renovations campaign. I mean, they had that whole superpower campaign going on where the people are donating millions and millions of dollars. Mm-hmm. They're building funds.
So are they living to some extent off reserves, long-time reserves?
I think it's a combination of that plus they've got the captive public that he does have just keeps coming up with more donations. All I'm saying is this. I know for a fact that the statistics internationally, and it's a well-known fact within Scientology management, that from 1990 until December 2004 when I left, the statistics were on a grade like I'm talking about here. Every year prior to that, I'm talking about the delivery statistics, amount of well-done auditing hours, intensives completed, levels completed, even donations, okay? For every year, up to 3 years after L. Ron Hubbard's death, you had a steady upward progress for decades. 1990, when he took total control and Pat Broker was taken out, it's been like the St. Moritz slide. It's just a complete, uninterrupted downward trend, okay? Mm-hmm. But in that same period of time, there's been all these other gimmicky things, like Golden Age of Tech, you now got to redo all your training. Golden Age of Tech for OTs, now you got to redo all your OT7 auditing. New books, you now got to buy new book packages, and everything you ever read before, you never really got, and you never really got anything out of Scientology in the first place until you redo these books again. And incidentally, you need to buy 5 other copies for, to set into libraries. The IAS is doing all this other stuff for, Scientologists, and they're running these campaigns. You need to donate to them. There's all these donate things, but it's a captive public is what I'm saying to you. Now, sure, there's new people coming in, but it's just nowhere near. Listen, if the statistics were like the type they're portraying at the events, they wouldn't have 40% capacity going on over at the Fort Harrison. I mean, it's a static. They're scavenging off and cannibalizing off a captive public.
When you were last in the organization, when was the last time you saw these statistics? I'm trying to get at how would you have occasion to actually see these statistics?
They're on all the computers at International Management at the base.
So you would...
Yeah, every week you plug in at Thursday at 2 o'clock, and they're all tallied up, and you just go, and they show you the whole graph. Mm-hmm. You can go 12 weeks, you can go 24 weeks, you can go 26 weeks, you can go 52 weeks, you can go 3-year graph, you can go 15-year, the whole thing. But Tom, this is such a well-known fact that graph, those graphs, those long-term since 1990, are pinned up on the wall up in international management. I mean, that's a given fact. And I knew as of 2004, and I've had people leave who've been up there who tell me it never reversed, at least as of 07.
And there's a name in Scientology for that kind of trend, right? What's that called?
That's emergency.
Emergency?
But over a long term, it becomes a danger. Emergency over a long period of time, unchecked, meaning unreverted, turns into a danger.
I'm going to move ahead a few years down the line here to the late 1990s when another landmark moment for the Church of Scientology, the Lisa McPherson case. Can you just generally describe your role in handling that case for the church?
Okay. My role in the Lisa McPherson case began, I guess, a little bit earlier than the Lisa McPherson case. I had left Scientology in late 93, November 93, right after we got the exemption, about a month after we'd gotten tax exemption, because it was something I sort of hung on and had been working on for 9-10 years and got, okay. Shortly after that, I had left. David MIscavige persuaded me to come back. I went off to the ship in the Caribbean that we have to do training and get auditing services, which I really hadn't had a lot of in the 10, 12 years I'd been in Scientology. When I was done with all that, I'd come back to the Flag Land Base in the summer of 95. And I was working for the RTC office at Flag under a woman named Angie, who was in charge of that office. And basically, she was David MIscavige's representative there. She was supposed to be handling all the technical quality aspects of the church there. I had expressed some criticisms about the way she was handling some of the technical matters, the way she was coaching people on their communication drills and on how they handled their metering. And shortly after that, MIscavige showed up to the base, and I guess he heard I'd been saying such things and told me with no uncertain terms that I'm not to be telling anybody anything. I was supposed to be doing what she tells me to do. You know, I was the guy that blew the organization 2 years earlier. I'm supposed to follow her lead. He doesn't want me anywhere near him or on his lines. He doesn't want me bossing anybody around. And so it was like, you know, it was pretty much keep your hands off of, you know, any involvement in any decision making. So I was working on a whole program to rehabilitate the Class 12 auditors at Flag, because there was a lot of complaints from parishioners about their services. And in the course of this, I was walking through the Hubbard Guidance Center of the Fort Harrison when all of a sudden, where it's a completely quiet area. Everybody knows that, has been in Scientology for any long. That whole huge floor, it's all connected by a common hallway, is a silent zone because people are having auditing sessions in each one of them. I was walking through that one day and a door kicked open and I heard this loud voice hollering in glee in the hallway. And I thought that was really odd, and I went and inquired about what was going on, and I went up to one of the Class 12s and I said, "What's happening here?" He said, "Oh, that's Lisa McPherson. She just attested to clear." So I just, even though I was told I wasn't supposed to, you know, say anything to Angie, I went down to talk to Angie. I said, "You know, you've got somebody up in the Hubbard Guidance Center who just attested to clear, who looks to me to be on the verge of psychosis." And she quickly reminded me that I'm not supposed to be having any say about anything and, you know, keep your mouth shut. She said, "That's Lisa McPherson." She says, "David MIscavige is CSing and programming her case, and I'm reporting on it weekly." Like, in other words, buzz off. to which I just went about my business and didn't think anything about it. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess about 6 weeks later, or several weeks later, I hear that there's this incident where Lisa McPherson had a psychotic break and is coming to the Fort Harrison. And I inquired about that, like, how could you have somebody come to the Fort Harrison? It was Angie or her direct junior, I think her name was Ricky, said, well, it's not a problem because COB, meaning David MIscavige, has directed us on handling a Type 3 at the base just last May, because somebody went nuts in the middle of one of the events that he does down there.
What's a Type 3?
A Type 3 is a person who's had a psychotic break. Okay. And so a guy went Type 3 in the middle of an event, and he knew all about it, and we handled the whole thing right here on the base and reported the whole thing to him. So I said, okay. And it's none of your business, I'm handling it. She'd already told me that she's been reporting on the case weekly to him. So I thought nothing of it. I guess 9 days later, something like that, Janji now comes to me and says, hey, when you're doing a Type 3 handling, what kind of sedative do you use if a sedative's required? Like, is Valium, or do you use something like that? I said, well, no, we usually, I've seen Type 3 handlings or participated in them for 20 years, and everybody always used chloral hydrate because it's the most mild, least narcotic sedative, and is very, very effective at getting somebody to sleep, and that's the whole purpose of it. And I had, that was the only back and forth I had during that matter of her there. But I thought it was really strange because we're 9 days into it. I said, you're telling me 9 days into it and you're looking for a sedative? Tom, this is what you need to understand. On a Type 3 handling or a psychotic break handling, it's generally, you've heard this thing about the person's put into isolation, right? Okay. That whole thing lasts a day, maybe two max. Do you understand me? Mm-hmm. In other words, if it goes beyond a day or two, there's something really weird going on. I've never seen it happen before. Well, subsequently, I learned they've got her in a room which is facing Osceola Avenue, and there's city buses going by. There's all this noise going on. There's a whole chain of wild events that were going on that just don't bear any resemblance to how you're supposed to do a Type 3 handling. But I didn't know all that at the moment. It was only when I investigated it subsequently did I find that out. My point is, it's all hush-hush. This is my matter. This is something I'm reporting up lines, meaning to David MIscavige. Okay, so it's all her thing. So I'm supposed to go off and continue doing the things I'm doing around Flag at that time, which is inspecting course rooms, helping people with their communication drills and their meter drills, doing confessional auditing with the Class 12s, who were the highest level auditors down there, and all that sort of thing. One night, I'm back at the RTC office, and she's doing up her daily report that goes up to MIscavige. And usually I would come in and sort of verbally debrief on what I did during the day, and she'd integrate that into her report. We inspected this many course rooms, and we passed this many students, and we did this many confessionals, and these guys are coming around like this and that and that. Well, that evening, I couldn't do that because Angie was on the phone nonstop with other executives at Flag talking about McPherson because she'd been taken to the hospital. And I guess, so she wasn't even, accessible to me because she was nonstop on the phone. When it was all said and done, though, and they found out Lisa McPherson had died, she rushed out of the room and go ahead and meet with other executives on the base. So I didn't know what was going on. All I knew is that in my position, I was supposed to investigate the next day and find out what happened.
Okay. And from then on, you got pulled into the McPherson case. And what were your duties throughout the rest of the case when it went to litigation and everything? Okay.
I'll tell you what happened. The next morning I went to investigate what went on. Mm-hmm. And it was it was like walking into a disaster area. There was like 15 to 20 people who had been attendants. And it was like walking into a flood scene or something. I mean, they all looked devastated. They lacked sleep. Some of them had scratches and bruises from getting hit by Lisa. All of them were extremely emotionally distraught because each one of them put it on their shoulders that they had done something wrong. Well, quite frankly, everybody did something wrong because the whole thing was done wrong. I mean, you don't have 15 different people rotating in and out of a room with somebody who's psychotic. The whole idea of this this isolation is you don't have any external stimuli re-stimulating the person and getting them to set off again. If you have utter stillness and utter quiet, they tend to calm down enough that they can then communicate, and you can do some auditing, and then you can help bring them up and pull them out of the thing. Tom, I've seen this work on a number of people over the years, all the way from my beginning days in Scientology. It's really quite simple. They have 15 people rotating in and out. She's getting a different new stranger in the room every other day. They've got people in there bawling their eyes out. You're not supposed to say a word. In fact, you're not even supposed to be in the room. Okay? I mean, I can't describe to you how 180 degrees diametrically opposed the handling of her was to what the scripture says is the way you're supposed to handle something like that.
In fact, you had a phrase for how it was handled, a perfect storm or something.
I thought it was a perfect storm of incompetence and irresponsibility. And I say the irresponsibility and incompetence because the writings say that you've got to have a complete, full medical examination. You've got to rule out that this person isn't in some kind of hidden pain, and that's the source of all this, okay? You're not going to pull a person out of a wild area of spiritual and mental distraught if they're in excruciating pain. So a complete, thorough medical examination is required, okay? Never had it. They had a woman in there who was on staff, who was a doctor, who you later uncovered didn't even have a license and had lost her license for abusing medical prescription drugs. Who the CS, who's really the person directing the whole thing, he's assuming that she's done such, but there's no evidence she's ever done such. And it's a dueling match between Elaine Kartazinski, the CS, and Janice Johnson, the doctor. Janice Johnson thinks, boy, I'm under the direct supervision of a Class 12, the top CS at the Mecca of technical perfection, and he ain't telling me to do anything, so I must be doing everything right. You understand? And on the other hand, you got Elaine thinking, well, nothing serious can actually happen here because I've got a bona fide doctor who's going in to see her every single day. So each of them are pointing the finger in the other direction. Of all the people in the entire place, I mean, we had maids who were from Central America who couldn't even speak English, who spent an afternoon in there. 201, each one of them felt fully responsible for the result of that. The only ones that didn't were Elaine and Janice. Now, Elaine ultimately did, but I don't know if Janice ever did. But you understand what I mean by irresponsibility. Mm-hmm. They're pointing the fingers at one another, and they're the only two who were doing that. Everybody else who had no responsibility, really, because they're really at the beck and call of Janice and Elaine, they feel fully responsible. So that's the state of affairs. I know early on, that same day while I was doing all that, Angie said she had to go because she had to go handle the folder, which I subsequently learned was vetted of any evidences of MIscavige's hand in the deal. But this is what happened. So my whole mandate is to handle the internal aspect of it, just to get to the truth. And a day into that, the Clearwater police show up and say they want to speak to Elaine and Janice. Well, I guess somebody identified Elaine and Janice. I don't know how that worked, or they just voluntarily were the ones that said they were responsible. They had to go to the Clearwater Bank building and see the police. Not on my lines at all, because I'm only handling this, orders that are issued as per Dave MIscavige's orders. Well, what happens is Janice and Elaine go in and tell the police a complete and utter lie. They said there was no religious services whatsoever. This was all a situation of a woman coming for rest and relaxation at the Fort Harrison. So now that's on record with the police, okay? Later that day or that evening, I get a call that I got to go out to Clearwater Beach to get on a payphone to get a confidential call from David MIscavige. I get the call, and he says to me, "Why aren't you all over this thing? Why is Tom DeVocht handling the police, and why is Tom DeVocht arranging interviews? Where are you in all this? Why are you," and I'm not going to, by the nature of the whole relationship, you don't say, "Well, sir, 3 months ago you told me to shut my mouth," and when somebody says jump, I say how high. You don't do that. You listen and you take it and, whatever. But he's now saying, get on it. So that's the hand I'm dealt. I got 2 false sworn statements to law enforcement agents. I've got the worst possible perfect storm of incompetence and irresponsibility in terms of what actually went down, okay? And that's how it begins.
I want to go back and talk generally right now. Let's start in the middle of the decade, 2003 to 2004, something like that. Maybe even before that. Describe what it was like to work under David MIscavige in general.
In this decade,
yes,
it was working under David MIscavige from 2000 forward was a steadily deteriorating situation. And it's interesting you picked 2000 because in November 1999 was a big snapping point with the guy because Judge Moody in the civil case allowed him to be named in an amended complaint.
This is a Lisa McPherson case.
Lisa McPherson, it's actually the Dell Liebrecht executor, Fannie McPherson, mother, plaintiff versus Church of Scientology. And that was like the explosion of all explosions, that he was now potentially going to get deposed and be embroiled, and his name would be embroiled in that litigation. And I don't think he ever recovered from that, quite frankly. I mean, the guy was a deteriorating spiral from that point forward. He became progressively more antagonistic, violent, irrational.
Talk to us about some of the violence. What kinds of incidents did you see?
Regularly, David MIscavige would, in the middle of a conference, in a conference room full of people at the base, physically assault and punch, slap open-handed, grab by the neck, throw to the floor, a number of international executives. I mean, almost the very highest part of the Church of Scientology international hierarchy, from the WDC chairman, which is the highest post within CSI, which is Mark Yeager. He got beat on in the 2000s. I probably saw him get beat up pretty severely half a dozen to a dozen times. Mark Ingber, who also held that post but was more often on the watchdog committee member for finance, which is the highest financial person within the ecclesiastical hierarchy. I saw him slap him around, beat him up on a number of occasions. Ray Midoff, who was a senior CS International, the highest technical person in the technical hierarchy of the Church of Scientology, he would regularly hit this guy open-handed upside the head real hard and jar him, or grab him by the neck and throw him on the floor. And Mike Rinder, who was the WDC member for OSA, Office of Special Affairs, which handled all external facing affairs, probably got it worse than anybody else. I saw him get beat up at least a dozen times just in those last 4 years or so that I was in, and some of them were pretty gruesome.
Now, Mike Rinder, many of the public will recognize him. He is the face of Scientology. You see him on CNN and other networks taking Scientology's position on different issues. Is that correct?
Yes, for probably a 10, 15-year period, he was the face of Scientology to the general public.
Mm-hmm. And you say he was beaten. He was a favorite target of Mr. Miscavige?
Yeah, he was the most regular. I mean, I saw Tom Tobin, who was Mr. Clearwater, basically. He was the commanding officer of the Commodore's Messenger Organization, Clearwater, for a number of years in the 90s and into the 2000s. I mean, he was the glue that kept the whole operation together. He oversaw all the buildings and all that. I saw him get beat up a couple of times. In fact, the second time I saw it happen, it was in front of a number of people, and it was the thing that sickened me so much that it prompted me to get on my motorcycle and get out of there, because it was so gruesome, and I liked Tom so much that I was afraid I was going to do something I would really regret in retaliation for it, so I removed myself from the scene, and that was the day I literally got on my motorcycle and headed down the road.
Okay. By this time, you had been in Scientology 27 years?
Right.
Right. I mean, what do you, not just Tom's, the attack on Tom, but the others as well, what are you thinking as you're seeing these different attacks unfold before your eyes?
It's different, but I got to tell you, Tom, my thought was, I really do, and I'm just realizing this now, quite frankly, that November '99 incident of Miscavige getting pulled into the civil case really was a bit of a snapping point. I mean, he always was a brute, and he slapped around people for different things, but I wasn't so exposed to it because I was always off doing something else, and he seldom came at me physically, and never like he did with those guys. But it was a progressive thing, and I saw it as a dwindling spiral, the guy losing control of his mental faculties steadily over that period of time. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what, you want to know what was going through my head? That was what was going through my head. Initially, you're conditioned to believe that people have screwed things up so royally that is the appropriate response. And in fact, I had my share of people that I slapped around too, and I don't feel good about it, and I seek them out, and I try to apologize where I can. But never did I do things like he did to Mike Rinder or Tom Tobin. I mean, I remember getting Mike Rinder and, whacking him upside the head with an open hand and punching him in the stomach, grabbing him by the neck so that, so hard that he had, stress marks on his neck for a week, throw him on the ground, rip his face against a tree where his mouth's bleeding, and then start kicking him in the ribs while he's down. I mean, this is the kind of beatings I'm talking about.
Was that the incident in near Christmas 1997?
Yes.
Can you paint us a little picture of that incident again?
Okay, it's late '97. There was a lot of reports coming up from Clearwater because this was I think it was the first year of the Lisa McPherson vigils and protests and that sort of thing. So there was a bit of media, and this Miscavige would react really insanely to bad media. And it was a real tense period. And Miscavige was sick, and he was down in his room, which is next to this lounge that was made available for executives.
And are we out in California now?
We're out in California. We're at the Ent base.
Okay.
Out by Hemet. And I get a phone call from Dave's assistant and wife, Shelley. She says, you need to come down to Dave's room right away. So I ran down the hill, which is about 100 yards. Ran down there. It was a cold night in December. It was around Christmas time, '97. And I stood there. And she just went like this, and I just stood there. And then, there's a screen door. I couldn't see anything behind the screen door. It's Shelley standing outside the door with me. And then all of a sudden, about 2 minutes later, I see Mike Rinder coming around the other corner, huffing and puffing. He must have run up from where his offices are, which is about 300 yards. He rounds the corner, and right when he's in vision of the screen door flies open. Miscavige comes running out in a terry cloth bathrobe, and just starts beating on Mike Rinder across the face and the stomach. Mike's leaning over. He grabbed Mike around the neck, swung him into a tree. There was a little tree outside the door there, and he cut his lip across the tree, flipped him into the ivy, started beating on him, and started kicking him. There was nothing said. There was no reason given. I had no idea why I was there. I later sort of realized, remorsefully, that I guess this was sort of me being the silent enforcer. You know, I'm looking at it from Mike's viewpoint. Why would I be there? Okay. Finally, I think MIscavige realizes he's hurt this guy. His lip was bleeding. There was blood coming down his lip. He tells him to get up. Mike gets up. He opens up the door to the lounge, which is right next to his room. There's a bar in there. He's got all this fancy scotch that he gets sent in from the IAS from Scotland. Pulls one off the shelf, pours a half a glass, puts it on the counter for Rinder. He says, "Here, take this. Maybe that'll make you feel better," and then left the room. Okay. Now I compared. Okay, I don't know what it was about. To this day, I don't know why he did it. I assume it was because there was a bunch of stuff flapping in Clearwater. But Tom, nothing was said. Not a single thing. That's the type of behavior I'm talking about when I say dwindling. I mean, initially when I saw some acts of violence, maybe 6, 8 years earlier, there was usually something that happened, you know what I'm saying? Like somebody defied him somehow. And then, you know, I don't think it was ever justified, but it seemed to have some sort of justification. But it got to the point where this guy is literally pulling a stunt like that.
You know, there was another incident with Mike Rinder in Clearwater that you witnessed.
We were in Clearwater probably in 2000 or 2000, probably 2000, 1999 or 2000, when we were very deeply and intimately involved in the handling of the criminal and civil cases. There was a 2-year period down here. I think Dave was here full time, and so was Mike and I. And we had a conference room on the 3rd floor of the West Coast building, which is the building catty corner to the Sandcastle Hotel. It's a little management building. It's not a big one. It's the old stucco, South Florida stucco style building. Mike and I used to operate from a conference room. Dave had a whole suite of offices that adjoined that, and he had a big office at the end of the hall. One day, and I can't recall to this day what it was about, but I know Rinder was sitting at a conference table, you know, with a chair, so he's sort of pinned in like this, you know, the table's here, and Dave comes up from the side of him unannounced and hit him up open-handed upside the head, knocked him back, shoved the chair in so Mike is defenseless, and Mike screamed, and then MIscavige started screaming at him, saying, "Are you trying to make me wrong by screaming? What do you know?" He started screaming obscenities at him, and then grabbed Mike by the neck and twisted him out of the chair. Mike was sort of pinned in because the chair was pinned up against the thing, so he couldn't easily roll off. And MIscavige is ripping his neck like this, pulled him down and just threw him down on the floor by his neck. And Mike was really yelping in pain. And he, you know, I've seen Mike get beat before, and he wouldn't say a peep. But he was really in pain, and I know for certain that this was a severe injury because I was working with him day in and day out during that entire period. In other words, our organizations were in LA and INT, respectively. When we were down there, we were just working for MIscavige. So Mike and I would drive home together at night at 2 in the morning. We'd drive in at 9 in the morning. We'd eat breakfast. You know, we lived together, basically. His neck was all kinked up, and he was limping around like stuck like this for at least a week after that beating.
How did that attack end? Did Mr. MIscavige walk out of the room? What happened?
Stormed out, made his point, whatever his point was, because he's always screaming and hollering at the guy when he's you know, beating on him for some perceived slight or perceived wrong. But Tom, by that point, I can't give you the, you know, they lost their significance as it got so routine and regular. You know, you can't always attach significances to them because, like I said, sometimes they just didn't have any significances attached to them.
How routine and regular was it? I mean, was this every meeting that happened, once a week, or could you describe?
Yeah, well, it's hard for me to say because, I was so often out doing things in different places. Like I'd go off to Clearwater and be gone for 9 months. So I wasn't, privy to what was going on at INT. Or I'd be off to LA to handle something for a month at a time. Or, I was on the Tom Cruise thing for 6 months where I didn't do anything else. I was at the Celebrity Center in Los Angeles, okay? But during the last 9 months or so, after I had done a big stint in Clearwater on the McPherson cases and come back towards the end of 2003, during the last couple of months there, I mean, it was every day. MIscavige was beating on somebody every day, and it got so bad that he then literally, in late 83, in January of 2004, he finally got everybody who was connected with international management, the whole watchdog committee, the International Management Executive Committee, which included Guillaume Lasserre of the ED International, all of the senior CS office, all the senior technical people in Scientology, and literally locked them in a double wide, where he would then just about every day come in and beat somebody up, Tom. And then that wasn't good enough. He started inciting others to start hitting others, like really pushing on them. And really saying, really needling them like, well, you're a suppressive person because you're letting this ethics, you're just as suppressive as that person if you don't, you know what I'm saying? And it was getting to the point where people were starting to slap one another around. To have 40, 50, something like that.
And you said earlier they could not leave.
Well, it got to a point where I think it was mid-January, he said, okay, that's it, you're all staying here. Until the org board's done, the postings are done, the finance system's done, all these things that he won't ever let get done. They got to get them all done, and nobody's leaving. You can sleep under the desks. You can have your food brought up to you. You can have a shower in the morning if you run. You can run off to a place on the property, you can get a shower. And otherwise, you're here 24/7. And that's what was done. And literally all the people, they rolled out a sleeping bag or, slept on the carpet and in their clothes with a jacket over them or whatever. I mean, they were allowed to have pillows. And they lived there for a couple of weeks. Now, this went on for years, but I only witnessed the inception of it because there's only so much, as Popeye says, there's only so much I can take and I can't take no more. I mean, he put me in there and I lasted 4 days. And that was it. Because I saw him ruining people. I mean, literally making people think that they're suppressive, and while he's suppressing them, and then becoming completely ineffective and just spun in and incapable of doing anything. And I think that's why Tom left. I think that's why Mike left. I think that's why a number of people left who could only take so much. They weren't going to become that, what he was making people into. So you get put in there. Why did you get put in there? Because I back-talked to him on a couple of scores. One, I'd come back from Clearwater, and he'd give me a grand tour of his $75 million office building that he had Tom DeVock build for him. And he took me through the whole place with he and his wife's assistant, Shelley, and he took me through and wound up the tour in the IG wing, which was a tremendous office. IG, what does that stand? Inspector General. And you're the Inspector General. Yeah, well, I guess so. Because what happened was when I went off to handle Tom Cruise in 2001, it was like, you're not the Inspector General, but there was never an issue. I was never had a community of evidence. It was just, like I said, it's a big hey you deal. You never know what your status is. But I walk in there and he shows me the whole thing and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking to myself, this is bizarre. I mean, this is like, if L. Ron Hubbard saw something like that, that kind of waste and extravagance, I mean... This building is in the compound in the desert? It makes the flag place, with the imported Madrid carpets and the marble Italian tiles, look like trailer trash. I mean, this place has got imported sandstone walls, it's got metal walls with the imprints of Dianetic trademarks on them, and Scientology trademarks. It's got etched glass windows, 40-foot ceilings with these intricate stained glass pattern, imported tiles from Italy. It's just way beyond and beyond. And nobody can go in there except for him and his staff. I mean, it's big enough. It's 55,000 square feet. It's big enough for like 300 people. And the only people who are in there is him and his personal staff, like 6 people. Because now by this point in the game, everybody's suppressive, including RTC. Well, he tried to bring me, he brings me up there, takes me through the place. I look at the whole place. I'm utterly unimpressed. He takes me into this office, and I'm looking at it's like John Thane's office, the Merrill Lynch guy, who just, for the $750, $75,000 trash cans and all that stuff. That stuff doesn't turn me on. It particularly doesn't turn me on when I know it's parishioners' money that's paying for this stuff. And it particularly doesn't turn me on when I know L. Ron Hubbard would roll over in his grave if he saw somebody being that extravagant. So I'm not dancing, I'm not break dancing, or I'm not doing the moonwalk over this. And he flips out. Look at this guy. He's suppressive. Shelley, look at this guy. He's not even impressed. I worked, blah, 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 blah. He goes into one of his temper tantrums. That was the first part. The second part was he wanted Tom Cruise to go get services up at INT. Okay, long story. That's another long story, but the bottom line is this. He wants Tom Cruise to be in it so he can get his talons into him and make him his little best friend and confidant, and I don't know, suck the life out of him, because that's basically what I've seen him do. But my perspective was I spent 1.5 years, 2 years getting the guy back on lines, and I'm thinking, Tom's now going to go down to Clearwater and participate like every other Scientologist. And to me, that was the end phenomena of me doing a repair. I told you I went in and did repairs, fixed up things that nobody else could handle. I thought, and when I said that, oh my God, I think that was the second time he took a swing at me and hurt his hand.
This is in the big.
And when I said, he said, Tom Cruise is going to come up here. And I said, well, he should be at Flag. And then he flipped out and said, Shelley, look at this guy. Only person in the world who would backflash me. Only person in the world who will talk back at me. The IRS won't talk back at me, but this guy will talk back at me. Long story short, next thing I know, I get called down to SP Hall.
Well, people are eating there, they're sleeping there. I'm just curious about the conditions in this.
Well, I'm going to tell you, because the next step is I get introduced. Because I backflashed him one too many times, I get introduced to SP Hall. And Dave announces to all the 40 staff members who were there, I realize now this is my SP, pointing at me. This is the suppressive person who's destroying my case and making my life so miserable. Right?
Okay.
Yeah, and there's 30 of the 40 of them are looking at me through glassy eyes because, yesterday it was one of them, and the day before it was another one of them. And you know what I'm saying? Like every day he's announcing the new find of who the real suppressive is. So now I'm the real suppressive. So MIscavige tells them, all right, this guy's been suppressing me covertly for 20 years, And so there's one new rule in this place. And the new rule is this. If anybody listens to a single word that Marty says, you're getting instantly declared suppressive person, expelled, excommunicated from the church. In other words, he wanted to make them know I'm the bottom of the bottom, right? And like I said, half of them are looking at me with these glassy eyes like they've had the same introduction. Each one of them's had the same introduction. It grows old after a while. In any event, Tom, what happens is this. He leaves the room. MIscavige and his entourage leaves the room. Tom DeVock is in charge of the group. He's the in charge. He's been appointed like 3 days earlier by Dave.
And Tom was at one time at Clearwater headquarters in Flag.
Right. But Tom DeVock is the in charge of the room. So when Dave leaves, he's the guy who has to keep everybody all organized, and they got to go try to stay focused on what, I don't know. They're supposed to be working on the org board, all these things that Dave will never approve. So Tom DeVock hears that whole thing, right? The first thing he does when Dave leaves the room is come over to me and he says, Marty, what are we going to do? He asked me. The thing, he was supposed to be declared suppressive, and he did. I went, Tom, I don't know. Listen, I guess all you can do is try to fly below the radar and try to figure out what the answers are to the questions that he wants to hear. Like, don't try to figure out what the real answers are. Just try to keep feeding him what he wants to hear. And he kind of laughed or whatever. But that Tom was such a direct person like that, that was why I was so fond of the guy. He was always a very direct person, but and he wouldn't get programmed by this stuff. Like MIscavige says, first guy says anything, he's going to get declared. First thing Tom does is violate it. Come and see me. So, and that's why the next events that folded out that led to me leaving were so significant to me, because I had a great deal of respect and affinity for Tom.
So you're in this place called SP Hall,
right?
The double wides, and you're in there for a few days, and Mr. MIscavige suggests a game.
A couple of days.
Okay.
And it's all part of this theme of offloading. So he was constantly telling everybody, I'm going to offload you. That's a big threat he has. I'm going to offload you from the Sea organization. You're going to get dumped at a bus station in Vegas and go fend for yourself, and you're declared, and you know what I'm saying. So one night he says, all right, we're going to, because one of the games he played, I told you, MIscavige used to say, you guys got to handle the postings, you got to handle the org board, you got to handle the finance system. I forgot one of the other ones. The other one was, you got to handle the offloads. And there's always this thing about determine who's going to get offloaded. It's like the Stalin purges, you know what I'm saying? Get all the people that have intention counter to mine out of here, right? So that was another figure thing. So now, since nobody will come up to him with a list of who needs to be offloaded to make everything peaches and cream up there, he says, I've decided how we're going to get the offloads done. So he comes in and he makes everybody arrange the chairs around the big conference table and flip them backwards so the chairs are facing out. And he says, you all remember musical chairs from your childhood. And then he goes through a description of how you play musical chairs. And he counted them all up, made sure there was one less chair than there were people. And he says, when the music starts, you go around the chairs, and when it stops, you get in the chair. And whoever doesn't get in the chair, you're offloaded. But it's just going to keep going until there's only one left. Okay? Listen, guys like Tom and myself are looking at this like rolling our eyes, like, here he is into his psychosis, but a lot of people were taking this seriously. I mean, one guy, I remember, so he started the thing, and not only, there was this whole twisted thing about it, too, because he played this song, Bohemian Rhapsody.
The one by Queen?
By Queen, yeah, and there was all this significance attached to it, because he was saying, you guys, nobody cares, because, you've all committed these heinous crimes against humanity, and now you're in the same position as this guy in the song, that nothing matters anymore, right? So this song got played over and over all night long as he played this sadistic game of musical chairs. Tom, I'm telling you, some people that are hardened vets, like myself and Tom DeVocht and probably Mike Rinder, some of the others, you're taking those with a grain of salt because you've seen a lot of surreal stuff with this guy. But some people that weren't so hardened or so inured to that kind of conduct and so exposed to it, this was extremely emotionally trying for these people. I remember one kid was literally crying because he got eliminated, and then MIscavige started having his secretaries run up to the office because he had his reservations computer to print off tickets. Like he said, we're going to offload you to the Edmonton org. It gets 22 degrees below zero out there in the wintertime. And so anyway, one of those kids got a ticket, and the guy was weeping. He says, what are you weeping about? He says, my wife. Because he'd said, you're going to leave your wives behind. You can leave your family behind. You're just going to go off. You know what I mean? He's literally going to separate families for good. And this guy's weeping. So what MIscavige says to him? Tough. I don't see anybody weeping for me.
So he's playing this song, and he tells someone to stop it, start and stop it.
Right.
And what is happening between these adults as they circle and try to find a chair when the music stops?
Oh, they're scrambling and hammering. I had a bad back. I have a bad lower back, and it got knocked out because a guy who was pretty chunky hit me as I was going for it. Just I was eliminated pretty early. Plus, I didn't really care because I know everything. These threats, just you know what I'm saying. You get to a point where it's like,
and did the game?
It's an overload, but it got really vicious because I watched most of it because I got eliminated early. I mean, there was guys getting in fights for the chairs. I mean, one chair, they literally, it was like an office swivel chair, and two guys were going. No, it was one of the hard-backed, like an auditorium movable chair, and they literally tore that whole chair apart. These two big guys got in a fight over the chair, and one took the top off, one took the thing off, and they were bending all the metal, just destroyed the entire chair. But there was people, ramming people in, like, cross body blocks into the walls, and ripping people's clothing off, and it was really really pretty sickening.
How long did it last?
Hours. It's like it started. I mean, I couldn't give you exact times because you lose a sense of time in a scene like that. But it was like, I think it started like midnight and went to 4 a.m. or something like that. Probably 3-4 hours.
Okay. And at the end, I presume there was a winner. Somebody still standing with her had a chair.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it was all meaningless to me at that point. I mean, like I told you, I got out early, and you know what I'm saying?
Okay.
But interestingly, now that you bring that up, as I recall, it was a woman who was a Kool-Aid drinker, who if this guy ever does go the full Jim Jones route, will probably be right behind him. I mean, so you get the idea of who was serious about it.
Okay. Now, so it's he leaves at one point. Well, how does he say goodbye for the night?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I'm just blanking it out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm just, it's funny, you're in a surreal scene like that, and you decide not to participate, and it just, it's like literally I recall looking out the window. Looking out the window at the grounds and trying to see some car lights pass on the, just to distract myself. It's, what I'm saying? I don't know how he left, but I do have this general concept that it was get your bags packed because it's really going to happen type of thing. Mm-hmm. And then and so people were left in the limbo of thinking the next morning they were going to Timbuktu or getting offloaded entirely, or what I'm saying, getting shipped halfway around the country, mm-hmm. And that sort of thing. And then the next day it was like, I don't even remember how it came up, but it was like, oh, we're not going to do that now, we're going to do something else. February 2004, I distinctly recall it was 234.
Okay.
Tom DeVocht's over working on a project over in the tapes building, which is across the street across the highway from SP Hall. And you got to go through a tunnel. I think you all have been there before. And then it's about a quarter of a mile down, and there's what's called the manufacturing building. And he was doing some project for MIscavige because he was the one guy who was allowed to leave the hall because he had been appointed in charge of the hall because he'd given so many right answers, I guess. I guess that was the statistic. Something like that. So in any event, Tom's over there. And I just had this thing with Tom 2 nights earlier where, he was on threat of SP declare. If anybody listened to me, the first thing he did, he came over and asked me a question. I just had that, that back and forth with him. And we had some more communications about, what do we do here? And it was almost on the verge of conspiratorial. You know what I mean? Like, it's like you're talking about your uncle who's drooling down his chin in the corner, and you're talking about it, but you can't really, you know what I'm saying? How are we going to deal with Pops? But, you couldn't go there because if you got caught doing that, you'd be declared forever. But we're reaching that level where we're sort of having a tacit agreement that something needs to be done about not this scene, but this guy. You know what I'm saying? So I had sort of that bond with Tom. And so Tom's over there. So we all run double time because we all had to go over there. We were summoned over there by MIscavige. We all arrive over at the manufacturing building. The 40 people from international management are all sort of in this semicircle. And on the other side, there's a semicircle of Golden Area production executives. They're in charge of the studios there. And in the middle is Tom. MIscavige comes pulling in with his little entourage of 5 or 6 and starts interrogating Tom. And Tom, like, lagged for a second, like, thought for a moment before he answered a question. And before he could even look back up, MIscavige was flying towards him with his fists flailing and just started beating the living hell out of Tom right in front of everybody and got him up against a pallet of boxes, as I recall it. It was hitting him in the face and in the stomach and, you know, hitting him to the ground and then hitting him. And having been very close to Tom, it had a lot of impact on me. And it was really a deciding point for me because it was, I really crossed a bridge right then and there. And I knew I was restraining myself because my impulse was to defend him, and I was afraid to do that because I had made a decision early on in my life when I confronted some life and death situations that if I had to defend against a psychotic bully, I would maim him if I had to in order to protect who needed to be protected. So there was a lot of restraint going on there because I decided if I don't remove myself from this environment, something really ugly is going to happen. And so I watched it and I restrained myself. And then we all went back up to the SP hall, except I slipped out to the side into the bushes, went and retrieved my motorcycle, which is a 650 Yamaha, and wheeled it down the hill, got it over by the back gate, and waited in the bushes for the gate to open. And then as the car went out, and before the gate closed, I gunned it and headed off down the road. And that's the last I saw of the Ent base.
Now, you had been in Scientology at that point for 27 years.
Right.
You're in upper management. You're used to making big decisions and sort of taking the long view on things.
Right.
And yet here is this impulse decision. How do you explain that? How that happened?
Well, I explain it because I can't imagine a more surrealistic scene going on. Listen, I watched the Jonestown documentary this year for the anniversary of the Jonestown, and I'd never seen that before, even though I had to defend allegations that linked us up with Jonestown. But I got to tell you something, because quite frankly, there is no parallel. But I'm going to tell you, in those last days of MIscavige, I listened to those tapes of Jim Jones. That's exactly what MIscavige sounds like. You look at those tapes and footage that they have of Jim Jones where he's got his own people in assemblies beating up on each other, and you hear the audio on it, and Jim Jones is cackling and giggling. That's what was going on. This guy relished seeing people in pain. This guy relished inflicting pain. It was a sadistic, surrealistic scene that bore no resemblance to what the subject is about, to what the founder was about, to what any of those people that I ever met during my whole 27-year career was about. And I felt I was in a position where I couldn't do anything about it. The only thing I could do was remove myself before I did something ugly that I would regret.
So you rode your motorcycle into the night in the desert.
Well, high desert.
High desert.
But it's cold. And I rode it for about 40 miles over to Riverside, through crisscrossing around country roads, and decided I needed to get a car because I was frozen to the bone. and called for a cab so I could make it out to Ontario Airport. It's the closest place I could rent a car. And I gave my motorcycle to a 14-year-old kid that was eyeing it, and his dad was there, and I told his dad that I know it. I know this doesn't make any sense, but this is my bike, and I don't need it no more. And your kid loves it, so take the bike. And the cab, you know, he was kind of like, all right. And the cab came, I just left. Got a rental car, got a fifth of Jose Cuervo, and drove up the coast.
Okay. What happened next?
I drank a bottle. Okay, Tom, I got a rental car and I drove up the coast and I drank a fifth of Jose Cuervo. And I'm a guy that hadn't drank for 8 years maybe. And even then it was once since 10 years earlier. So you can imagine the effect that that had. But I did still have my cell phone, and my wife called me, and she caught me in the midst of all this, and I told her in a nutshell, because she was down at Clearwater. She was now the RTC representative at Clearwater, right here at the Fort Harrison. And she said, I told her I'm just never ever going back. I said, that place is whack, and I ain't ever going back. And she said, okay, well, what about me? So it's a good question. Let me think about that, because she was a very nice person. Never did anything bad to me. Was always understanding, always loving. Problem is, we were married for 14 years, and I probably had spent 2 years with her. Because that was another penchant of MIscavige, was to break up people's marriages. You know, if not officially, then unofficially. Keep people separated all the time so they wouldn't create bonds, I think, was the real intention behind that. But in either event, she said, will you call me tomorrow? I said, yeah, because I was pretty incoherent. So I took off, and I was driving through the Santa Barbara Mountains, and I really grappled with this because it was really tough, you know. Because on the one hand, I never was ever going back, and on the other hand, she never did a single nasty thing to me, and was always very loving and understanding. You know what I'm saying? So it was a real unresolvable conundrum. So I turned to Jose Cuervo, drank the rest of the fifth, was driving off on a country road. Next thing I knew, I woke up in a ditch in a pasture, and tried to open the door, and it would only open 2 inches because there was a telephone pole looking right at me. So I realized right then and there I probably missed death by about 4 inches. In any event, that's how that evening ended. Okay, so the next day I phoned Ann, my wife, in Clearwater, and she said, okay, I've cleared it with COB, MIscavige. You don't have to go back there. Just come down here, and we can sort this thing out. And I said, well, you know, she says, it's okay, you don't have to go back there. I said, okay. And I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I just thought, what the hell? I mean, you know, she was right. There was one thing that stuck with me. What about her? And the reason I hadn't tried to recruit her to go with me is because she's a second-generation Scientologist. Her mother was on staff at Paris Org for the longest time, longer than I was ever on staff, even probably. I didn't think it would be ethical for me to be recruiting her to go with me. Because the other thing is it's sort of instilled in you, and I think people just natively do that because they're natively conscientious. You always try to put it on yourself too. You know, I always got even though I've got righteous indignation, and I've got this firm decision that I'm going to stand for this insanity, right? At the same time, you always got this niggling thing in the back of your mind. Maybe he's right. Maybe I am the suppressive. You know what I'm saying? And they all think that, and I know that because I've compared notes with a number of people who are similarly situated. You know, it takes, you know, okay. So she set up to have the plane fare, the ticket set for me at LAX. So the next day I drove down to LAX, flew to Clearwater. Anne met me, and it was sort of tacitly understood that she's going to be my, what we call terminal, the person that's handling you, right? So therefore, we weren't really going to have our marriage going on, but she was the only one I trusted and the only one I would talk to, so it would be very businesslike. Because it would work out okay since she cared about me and I cared about her anyway, so.
Okay.
I know that probably sounds really bizarre, but that's what it was. And so they put me in an apartment at the Hacienda right above hers.
The Hacienda is Scientology?
The Hacienda, Scientology birthing out here in the Hacienda Gardens in Clearwater. And the RTC women, there's I think 3 in the office, they had an apartment below. And then there was an apartment above it. I took that apartment. And the whole initial idea was, I had a lot of physical stuff ailing me at the time, so it was, hey, why don't you relax? While we get arrested, you've been under a lot of stress. We can handle all your physical problems, and you can listen to some Hubbard tapes and lectures. You know, part of the day, you can do some work over in the mill, which was great with me, 6 hours a day in the mill. You can do some workouts to get your body back in shape, the whole thing. So I said, great. It's something we can all agree on. So I'll do that. And that's what I did.
Okay. And you're back in Clearwater for how long a time?
I wound up staying in Clearwater for 10 months. Okay. I got there on like the 6th of February. I stayed there till the 12th of December. Initially, I had a number of things. I had calcium deposits in my neck. I couldn't even move it. I went through a whole chiropractic program and a nutrition program, totally handled that. I had gallstones, I had polyps, whatever. I had just a whole laundry list of things. So I just started knocking them off the list. We started handling those. And I started working out. I started working in the mill, which was further workout as far as I was concerned.
What's the mill? Is that
the mill? The carpentry mill in Clearwater.
Okay. Which services?
Down a little bit south of the Fort Harrison and over a few blocks. Okay. And it builds all the furniture for the various renovations projects for the church. Okay. And I got to work by myself, essentially. So I did that, and I listened to lectures, Hubbard lectures for 2.5 hours a day, until I hit the lecture on what's called black Dianetics, which was his description at the time of reverse Dianetics. And this was a significant point. This was a couple of months into the stay down there. And this was like in the 50s. This is early on in Scientology, Dianetics and Scientology, where Hubbard is saying, look, I think we've got enough of this route from slavery taped out, that I see an inherent danger, and that is this. If you put this in the hands of the wrong people with the wrong intentions, all they got to do is reverse it to make a slave. We're freeing you from the slavery of the mind and the slavery of positive suggestion this way. All they got to do is reverse it. And the whole purpose of the lecture was to talk about how we needed to have some system of ethics so that there was some standards, by which it was practiced. But listen to this, Tom. I'm listening to this lecture, and he's talking about the reverse of Dianetics is tell a person, because you're getting rid of positive suggestions through Dianetics and Scientology, and it could be laid in at times of unconsciousness, or it could be laid in through your education and training. Everybody in America and in the society, to one degree or another, the theory goes, is brainwashed. You're waking them up from this collective dream that people live in, and all these influences that they're not in control of. So in reverse Dianetics, he's saying, look, you just take what we do, and if you reverse that, you create the opposite. For example, you tell a guy he's stupid and evil enough, and a lot of people, after enough times, will believe you and start to act stupid and evil. Other people have a higher resistance, and you might need to put some stress in their environment and up the vehemence of the suggestion. You're evil and stupid. You're evil and stupid. Okay. But if you do it enough, there's a certain part of the population that will start acting evil and stupid. He says then you get to a sort of a higher, better off group of people, And now you're going to have to start entering in things such as sleep deprivation, food deprivation, heavy stress, and physical duress. You got to dig. Well, all these things I'm telling you about, up at int base where Miscavige is pummeling on people, he's screaming into their ears what dirty dogs and what evil bastards they are the whole time he's doing it. You think what I mean? And it's almost precisely what Hubbard describes in the tape as the only way you could sabotage this subject, and why it has to be kept in ethical and good-meaning hands. And that's why he called it black Dianetics. I call it reverse Dianetics because that has a racial overtone that I don't particularly like. It's the reverse of what the process is. You just reverse it, okay? I listened to that tape, and man, I can't tell you, man, I was on fire. And so Ann came to see me, because she used to come up every 2 or 3 days and ask me how it was going. We'd have a little 10-minute chat. I said, I'm done listening to this stuff. I've heard all I need to hear. I said, this tape describes precisely what Miscavige is engaged in. It is reverse Dianetics. Okay. At that point, I'm thermonuclear. I mean, I'm like radioactive. Nobody can talk to me because they know. And that's the way it goes. So she comes back the next day and says, well, COB is going to see you, when he comes here for March 13th event.
That's Miscavige.
Yeah.
Chairman of the board.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, it was like understood at that point, this guy's too radioactive for me to handle. You're going to have to deal directly with the boss. You know what I'm saying?
And so, did you ever, when you were in Clearwater, did you ever see David Miscavige again?
Well, yeah, she specifically told me, my wife told me, on March 13th, when he comes down for the March 13th Hubbard birthday event, he's going to see you. In other words, it's on the agenda.
Did you see him?
No. But I also saw him going off to watch the Phillies play against the premier of A-Rod for the Yankees 3 days in a row with my wife and his little entourage. I saw him going to the movies every night. And when all was said and done and he finished his week stint down here, I said to Ann, I said, what happened to Dave? Oh, he was so busy you couldn't believe. He's got the whole world in his hands. And, I've heard this spiel a million times. Of course, I know she's covering for the guy. And at that point, I know he's succeeding and, winning her over. Because, I see he's taking her out with the girls and the whole thing. And, I see him trying to drive the wedge, and it's like, I mean, I don't know how much more clear I could have made it to her that where I was coming from. But I didn't feel it was right for me that I, start actively recruiting her. So, but I got it out there. And then she said, May 9th, he's going to come on May 9th because they have the Dianetics event. May 9th comes and goes. No, Miscavige. And he's going to come on June 6th because he always comes via Clearwater and then back via Clearwater on the ship maiden anniversary event. June 6th comes and goes. By then, I'm buying, because I told her I'm not listening to these tapes anymore because I just the more I listen to them, the more pissed off I get and the more on fire I get. Because it's literally, when you start listening to the rest of the tapes, it's literally a reverse direction from everything that goes on at the very top in Scientology. And I told her I'm not listening to them anymore because it's just pissing me off beyond belief. So I started going down to the used bookstore over there by the Albertsons, about a mile and a half from the mill. I'd walk over there when I was done with work. I started buying books. I read about 30 books on history, philosophy, classics of literature, a lot of stuff about two of the greatest human features or qualities that I always thought Scientology was useful in helping enhance, and that is forgiveness, the power of forgiveness, and unconditional love. So I just started my own study while I was getting my body healed and getting in shape, and also just leaving it out there that maybe one of these events, because there's now Auditor's Day in September, the IAS in October, okay, and I've decided to stick it out for those. No Miscavige.
So it's October now. You've
Right.
been there what, 8 months?
8 months, right?
Right.
I'm in the best shape of my life. I had Thanksgiving. Well, the only friend I had, I didn't talk to nobody. I mean, nobody. She stopped coming in. When I made it clear we were going to have a showdown on black Dianetics, remember I told you I became sort of a radioactive particle? She never talked to me again. I mean, for months. And then I raised the issue again in November. It was after eating dinner with her Chihuahua dog. Thanksgiving dinner, I had a nice thing. They gave me a plate. They'd leave me a plate of dinner, and I split it up with the dog, and I had you do what you do in the circumstances you're in. So I had a family dinner with this Chihuahua, and I said to myself, you know what? I'm not spending another holiday alone.
So Thanksgiving passes, and then what happens after that?
All right. Well, I finally at some point took up with Ann that I was going to get this thing resolved. It's just, I'm sitting around here. What do you want me to just rot or what? And the response to that was no response. But I did notice the next day that she and the rest of the women that she was living with in the apartment from RTC moved to the other side of the hacienda. So I decided at that point, well, it's just a matter of time. I mean, they just don't want to confront this, and they can't confront it. Dave can't confront it, and won't. And so I started contemplating, what I was going to do and where I was going to go, and I really wasn't sure. I kind of thought I would just go as far away geographically as I could. In fact, that's kind of where I gravitated to, the furthest point geographically from the main places I worked at, Clearwater and Los Angeles. I wound up at the very south of Texas, outside of Brownsville on the coast, initially. But I remember the day I chose the day was, I knew it was the last day of the football season, and all I wanted to do was watch a football game. I hadn't seen one in a couple of years, so on a Sunday, I just put some extra change of underwear and toiletries in my carry bag that I always took down to the mill. And matter of fact, I don't think I had really even firmly decided that was going to be the day. I knew it was going to be someday. And I walked over there at noon on a Sunday, and there was nobody there. So I just decided to just keep walking. Walked a couple of miles, got a cab over to Tampa, and found a hole-in-the-wall bar and watched Tampa's last football game of the year that year, and got drunk with some guy off the street, and hung out till 4 o'clock in the morning, ate a pizza in the park with the guy, and then got on a bus for Orlando, got a car from there, and took off. And that was the end of it.
And so after 27 years, that's it for you in Scientology, on the staff of Scientology.
That's right.
What are you feeling about then?
What about then?
Yeah, I mean, what
I tell you, I had a whole gamut of emotion. I mean, I really wrote it. And I decided that, that part of this whole reverse Dianetics trip that MIscavige runs all the time is to get you to have this sort of false front of no emotion, which is, again, 180 degrees contradictory to what is available in the subject, because the whole subject is really very simple. It's really intended to make you more you, and make you be able to freely feel the appropriate emotion of the moment. One thing I decided to do, I wasn't going to try to hide from my emotion, and I experienced every emotion on the scale, up and down. I sort of adopted a little what I call music therapy, and I'd get in the car and drive and listen to music.
So you are 48 years old. You don't have, you've got no references now. You don't have I guess, presume you don't have a bank account or all the things a person living out in society would have. How do you restart your life at that age, at that point in your life, after this experience?
Quite frankly, I didn't really have that big of a problem because I had an inheritance. I knew ultimately I had access to almost $100,000 that my father had left me. I didn't have access to it right that moment, but I did have a credit card, so I knew I'd be able to pay the expenses back. So I literally just went on a 35-day exodus throughout the southern United States, all the way up the Atlantic coast through the Carolinas, across the Appalachians, down to the Gulf Coast, across, and all the way to the very tip of the country, where I ended up winding up. As far as the financial mechanics of all that, I mean, so many people have so many heart-wrenching and unbelievable stories, and I have so much admiration for them. I didn't really have that problem. I mean, my problem adjusting was doing something purposeful, and I had the resources to be able to do at least things that were for the moment purposeful. I mean, I started off volunteering at the Boys and Girls Club of Laguna Madre. I then was the players rep at the Little League. I then did a whole gig in Houston for this educational entertainment outfit, which I did for about a year and a half. I mean, for the first couple of years, all I did, I got into this whole cause up in these environmental causes up along Galveston Bay. For the first couple of years, I adopted a family that was a refugee from the Katrina disaster in New Orleans. Got them started, got them on their feet. Helped raise a kid for a year. My problem was getting out of doing purposeful things into doing mundane things to make a living. So it was really for me trying to find something purposeful. But I didn't have that same adjustment, economic adjustment that so many people do have. I mean, I've heard some stories that are just amazing in terms of, the resourcefulness, and I really feel for that, because if I just had to go out and do that, I can't imagine what I ended up doing, because I'm doing something purposeful, at least in my mind, for 27 years. My entire adult life, I can't suddenly just go do a 9-to-5 or go pimp real estate or go do something that has no purpose to it.
I take it from your comments that your feeling is that you think Scientology is a good thing, has impacted your life in good ways, but you don't think David Miscavige is doing the Church of Scientology any favors right now.
I think that Scientology has a lot to recommend it. Is every single bit of the way it's laid out and answer every single question, to get you to immortality forever? That I don't know, and that I even have doubts about. But I do know this: there is a core, big, huge chunk of it that really has something to offer to get somebody from a apathetic, non-meaningful existence to a purposeful, fulfilling, and existence, with much more possibility. I think it has a tremendous amount to recommend it. I think that under Miscavige's regime and the way he trickles that down, even to the public level, makes it impossible to obtain those fruits. And I'll explain it to you like this. Hubbard described the whole purpose of Scientology is to make the individual more himself. You're not trying to create a behavior. That's one of the 180 degrees dichotomies. He's incessantly obsessed with behavior, all the way down to the public. The public gets hassled if they do it. If a guy walked in with spiked pink hair into the Fort Harrison, and Miscavige heard about it, it would be like, oh my God, the guy'd be banned from the place forever. It has nothing to do with what the subject's even about, you understand? But it's reverse of it. Another 180 degree dichotomy. Hubbard's whole goal is to move somebody up the emotional tone scale towards the higher bands of, where a person's operating in the realm of postulates, of games, of action, of exhilaration, and, doing things to attain towards that, to what he called a natural insouciance, which is a wonderful French word that means a lighthearted disregard for authority and convention, okay? an opening up of the mind, okay? To be able to experience life and to live life in a meaningful, fulfilling fashion. And if you really understand the subject and you really study it deeply, if you're heading towards that, it's a real powerful thing. But if you're going the opposite direction and you're trying to mold people into behavioral patterns like conservatism and boredom and monotony and down into antagonism and anger where MIscavige operates 99% of the time, you wind up with the reverse result with the same processes. So it all has to do with purpose. And I think his purpose was 180 degrees opposite of what the purpose of the subject is. The purpose of the subject is to free and to make you more you, and his purpose is to make people less free and to make them more like what he perceives proper behavior to be, and therefore it's a 180 degree reversed dynamic going there.
If you had a friend or a relative who said to you, I want to join the Sea organization in Scientology, or I want to enter Scientology and receive services and progress up the line toward greater things, what would you tell that person now? Would you advise to join the church and go ahead?
It kind of depends on their circumstances, but I actually had that experience where I had a brother-in-law get approached by an org, and he had already sort of gotten to the point where there was a lot of emphasis on money. He hadn't taken any services yet, but he questioned that, and I essentially just told him as straight as I could where it was going to go and what it would cost. And he, being a guy who's got 4 kids, relatively young guy who's just hacking it, realized that it would be an impossibility for him to pursue that. I didn't have that in mind when I was giving him the facts, but I just try to give the person the facts, and they got to make up their own mind, and it depends on the circumstances. Although I will tell you, another friend said to me, I feel an obligation to, expose what's going on to, certain members of my family, because I got all my family members in Scientology. I got my brothers, my 2 sisters, and now my 18-year-old nephew is getting recruited for the Sea organization. And he said, if it was the Sea organization as you and I knew it, Marty, 18, 20 years ago, he said, I really wouldn't have much of a problem with that. But now if you think about it, he says, think about me when I go to bed at night, I think, good-looking 18-year-old woman, sharp, clean background. He says, she's bait for MIscavige. She can wind up in relatively short order getting on his lines and winding up in an SP Hall situation. And you know what? I can't argue with him. And I think that's part of this whole process of letting the truth be known, because the truth, though fought, ultimately in the end prevails. And so why fight it? Get it out there,
You've been out a little over 4 years now. Why are you speaking out now about this?
It's a long process. I think in the general interview phase we kind of went through this, but that kind of gets into that's a 20-minute thing. But you want to know why now I'm talking out 4 years after the fact? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of different dynamics that were involved in it, but one of them that was critical was seeing a friend that I knew from the very beginning when I got into Scientology. And he was explaining to me his difficulties with his family, because he'd gotten all his other siblings in, and his father's in his 80s, and his father can't understand, why can't I have one last family reunion, And he can't explain it to the guy. They can't, because my friend is declared, because he left the Sea Org, and therefore his brother and his other siblings that he got into Scientology have to remain disconnected from him. So they can't be at the same place at the same time. Okay. This is MIscavige Scientology. This is an anachronism. That policy is an anachronism. That policy I saw get reinstituted by, that policy was canceled in the 60s or early 70s, okay, and reinstituted. And I saw MIscavige and Broker and these guys who were doing all these power pushes in the early 80s manipulate all the reports that induced Hubbard to say, okay, yeah, put it back in, right? And they've used this policy that really was intended initially to be something that is a common sense thing. If you're with somebody who's dragging you down, it's your right not to listen to them, and turn it into a dictate to try to control people's flow of communication and loyalties, okay? And it's gotten so crazy that that was the first guy I met that I've talked to, that I used to know in Scientology. And I thought, well, I never really had that problem because all my family's dead pretty much. So I never, but I started thinking about it and the way he put it. And then his wife, same thing. And then I got in touch with somebody else, same thing. I mean, Tom, the first 6, 7 people I got in contact with who were old friends all had this problem. And I thought, how insane. And I put it against, I started thinking about my past. And like I told you, I saw this whole policy get manipulated. And that's just one. I've outlined to you a lot of things that MIscavige has got 180 degrees opposite of what the original intention was. And it got to a point where I felt like, you know what? Sunshine is the best disinfectant. Justice Brandeis originally said that, but I thought, you know what? That kept coming back to me. Some disinfectant is required here.
That's why the church believes it's so important to pursue a missing or fleeing staffer. Why does the church not allow them to leave and then start a new life? Why does the church pursue them?
They pursue them for concerns for security. And I'm going to tell you, quite frankly, it's the security of David MIscavige. When I got into the Sea Org in 1978, all the way through 1982, a 4-year period, when L. Ron Hubbard was directly on the lines, and I went to L. Ron Hubbard's base in the desert in La Quinta. There was no fence there. There was no concern about somebody blowing. I mean, there was a concern, but you didn't go, you have these drag nets that would go across the country. In fact, Hubbard had a policy, if someone wants to leave, give them a confessional. But the rule was, and it was in writing, you must say sayonara to the guy within 72 hours. If you wanted to, patch the guy up, make sure he wasn't going to be nattery or attacking the organization, if you wanted to do that through sex checks and confessionals, you had 72 hours to do it. The policy was, he's gone. It wasn't until MIscavige did his whole purges and takeovers through 81, 82, where he was purging a lot of high-level people and creating enemies. David Mayo, Dee Dee Riesdorf, the former COCMO, Gail Riesdorf, Bill Franks, the former EDN. All these people that he knocked out in these purges felt slighted and abused directly by him and became antagonistic, went to the media, assisted in lawsuits, and this was from the very beginning of his reign, that literally this whole policy was thrown out the window. And that's where we had the entrance of, rather than, if somebody wants to leave, good riddance, it became, you ain't going to leave until we're absolutely certain that you love David MIscavige and you would never say anything bad about him.
And this holds true for staff in Clearwater.
Okay. A blow drill essentially is I guess it's been codified now. Originally it was sort of more informal, but it's a codified series of steps that a number of people go through to get a staff member who's left unannounced to come back and get them back onto the base. And that begins with immediate physical pursuit as need be. It means covering every mode of transportation the person might flee to, from bus stations to train stations to airports. It includes going through all their files, their life history folder, which gives a person in order to come to the base, must disclose everything that's ever happened in his life in terms of every friend he's ever had, every school he ever went to, every job he ever had, every sexual relationship. I mean, it literally has the doctor that delivered the guy. I mean, they got everything on him in that life history. His personnel folders, his ethics folders, and his counseling folders. All that material is pulled together, drawn upon to do a complete profile, to get a prediction on where the guy might head, and to figure out what buttons you might push with the guy to get him, to persuade him, when you do find him, to come on back to the base.
You spoke, Marty, of you and Mr. MIscavige talking about Pat Broeker and having an ongoing interest in Pat Broeker. What came into play there in the years after he left the Sea Org?
Well, Pat was an interesting fish because MIscavige, all he was concerned about was getting materials that Hubbard had written about the upper levels, Hubbard's PC folders, notes that he had done that Broeker alluded to, that were essential to compiling certain Scientology levels that hadn't been released and this sort of thing. Broeker had been hiding these, using them as a last defense to prevent MIscavige from wiping him out from having any authority or influence in the church. This was all part of this power push against Broeker. And once we did this huge confrontation where I had brought in a number of PIs, security guys, you know, hired guns literally, to come in so MIscavige could have a direct confrontation with Broeker. Was me, Will here, Starkey, all of his henchmen, all of MIscavige's henchmen came in and and MIscavige had his confrontation with Broeker, and finally got Annie. Annie finally broke under the pressure and told Dave where Pat was storing the materials at a storage space. Well, once the materials were gotten, Broeker had no more cards to play, and he basically said, "Screw it, I'm out of here, I'm leaving." And he came directly to me. He said, "Marty, you get on this guy because I want to know every move he makes." You know, because of course his only concern was going to be Pat going public against him. So I immediately set up a whole network of investigators, private investigators, to literally trace every step this guy made. I had a private investigator befriend him. What happened was Pat went out and initially lived with a woman who was a veterinarian for LRH's ranch. And I found out what his watering hole was through surveillance. And then I got a friendly old guy who was a retired cop go in there and sidle up and start buying drinks for Pat. Became friendly with him. You know, the guy was a good listener. Became a confidant. For Christmas, my investigator bought Pat a phone that's a cordless, so it sends a radio signal from the headset back to the receiver. Because we had done some research and found out that you could be several hundred yards away from the house, and if you had a police scanner or a radio scanner, you could pick up that signal. And Dave loved this idea. He wanted to hear as many conversations as he could with Pat, and we literally recorded all his conversations for probably a year period. We knew everything he was up to. We knew where he was going to go different places, and then we'd have teams of investigators follow him. And we had it down to the point where Dave really wanted me to get something on Pat so he could have some insurance policy. I feel bad about talking about the details of the guy's life. Suffice it to say, I don't want to go into details simply because, it's bad enough that I did it.
And how many private investigators worked on this case, if that's the right word for it?
Okay. Well, I had the original operative, the agent, okay, and he was one guy that went on for several months, maybe a year, almost full-time working on him. And then I developed a team. I initially started off with probably 4 or 5, group of teams. But then we got down to his patterns down so well, I got it down to 2 guys who were really good at being able to handle it on their own. So we had 2 guys that were pretty much the team, full-time for between 89 through 93 when I left Scientology initially the first time. So that entire period, those guys worked full-time on him. They were on him all the time. He was in San Luis Obispo. They followed him literally when he moved to Colorado, when he moved briefly to Wyoming, back to Colorado, and finally, ultimately, to Eastern Europe, believe it or not. And that was going on up to 93 when I left. I went away for 2 years. I blew. I've told this story. I went for 2 years away for training on the free winds. I came back. When I came back, MIscavige started getting more involved in external affairs again, all the copyright suits and all the other stuff that was going on, the McPherson case. So I learned from Mike Rinder at that time that Mike had picked it up after I'd left. So here we are 3-4 years later, it's still going on. Now, interestingly, I found out from Mike that as of when he left 2 years ago, Mike was shocked to see, because he hadn't been down at OSA for so long, he had no idea it was still going on. Literally in 2007, 18 years after I began that thing, those two guys were still on broker, because Mike saw it in the church's Scientology International's budget, because MIscavige had instructed him just on a whim, straighten that budget out. We're spending too much. So Mike went through this budget, and he saw they had, as of 2007, they still had those two guys on Pat Broker 19 years after the fact. And Mike said, well, this shouldn't be on here. I mean, how could we possibly still be interested? And struck it. MIscavige had his deputy, Warren McShane, come down and visit Mike, and he said, you out of your mind? You can't take that off of there. So, Joe, I have no reason to believe that to this day they've got the same investigators monitoring the same guy, which would be the 20th anniversary this year.
One more Sea Org member whose attempted recovery you were a part of is Terry Gamboa in the late 80s. Late 80s?
Correct.
Tell us about that one.
Terry Gamboa was the ED, Executive Director of Author Services. That was L. Ron Hubbard's personal literary agent, personal organization that kept all his business and finances separate from the church, handled all his books, all his intellectual property, handled his defense in the early 80s when he was alive. I was a legal executive over there, trying to get the all clear to make things safe for Hubbard. We handled every aspect of him. After he died, MIscavige, myself, Will here, we all went over to RTC and did a purge over there because nothing much was happening at ASI anymore after Hubbard died. It didn't have that much importance. Terry blew, I believe it was late 80s, 89, maybe 90, I don't know, back at that period. And again, this was one of those 7 Alert fire-ups because she worked intimately with MIscavige all through the all clear period, knew about all the stuff that went on with the Hubbard finances and the church finances and MIscavige personally. So I got pulled into Author Services. MIscavige held a big powwow there, and he brought in Mark Yeager, Mark Ingber, Ray Midoff, Greg Wilhere, Norman Starkey, who was the executor of the estate, right? They put in these affidavits like the executor of the estate is independent and doesn't answer to MIscavige. Well, Norman Starkey was the acting executive there, and of course, when MIscavige said leap, he asked how high. Everybody was there at attention, and I was there, because MIscavige was going to run a mission to intimidate the living hell out of Terry Gamboa. I don't even think the objective was to get her back. I think the intention was to scare the pants off of her, because this was the mission. All the people I mentioned, Greg, Norman, Midoff, Yeager, that whole lineup, which you guys have seen this before, where they all get together in an array and confront people. The intention was to do that to Terry and her husband. And we had PIs tracking her. This was several days after she had left. And we had PIs tailing her and her husband. They were driving across the country, and they were heading towards Nashville. So we timed this whole thing that it would be this whole confrontation in Nashville when they got to Nashville.
Yeah, it's private investigators.
Private investigators, right. Well, when I was at Author Services for this briefing, MIscavige turns to Norman and he says, Norman, did she have access to that safe? And in the safe there was some kind of documents that he treasured, and I don't even recall what they were. They had to do with the estate. They may have,
estate.
yeah, they may have had to do with the family, and now they switched the wills up on them. I don't know what it had. I just don't remember the significance of them. It was between Dave and Norman said, I don't know, sir. To which MIscavige went into these tyrannical rages about, Norman, you fool, you idiot. How do you know? And it was like, God, it sounded like this could affect the exemption, of the tax exemption of the church. And it was like, the guy was really flipping out. He says to me, Marty, you have got to find out whether she got those documents, right? Well, I was reporting that she was carrying a briefcase with her. We were finding out through the private investigators. So I had informed MIscavige that she had, she had her, whatever they took with them, and one of the things she had was a briefcase, which was a little bit of an oddity. A person just doesn't generally have that. And when I reported that she was bringing it into her hotel room or sometimes leaving it in her car. And so he got all fixated on, I got to get into that. You got to get into that briefcase because I think those documents are in there, right? So, by any means necessary, you find out, you get into that briefcase.
Oh, those are words that came to you?
That's what the orders I got from MIscavige. You get into that briefcase, I don't care what it takes. Do you have a PI who can do it? I said, I'll get a PI who can do it. And I went through Ingram and got a guy who was an expert at quickly popping locks.
Ingram is Jane Ingram.
Right, and we knew,
an investigator who's worked for the church for years.
Yeah, and we knew that was a combo, 3-tumbler combo lock. So I got a guy, and I had him do it. Show me, he could go, within 30 seconds, boom, any briefcase, Said, okay, that's the guy we need. So he flew out to Nashville, and with another private investigator. And my mission, the mission was this. All those big executives I told you about, we're going to get her into a room and give her what is called an SRA. That's a term that MIscavige is very proud of having developed, created, and that is now a part of the Scientology vernacular. It stands for severe reality adjustment. It means you get in somebody's face so hard that you adjust their reality, okay? That means you get right up in their face and scream and holler and rip them a new one. Is another one that's becoming part of the vernacular. They were to give her a 6-on-1 or 2, because Fernando would be there, SRA. So she would be scared. Would never think about messing with the church. While she's doing that, Marty, you, by hook or by crook, get your hands on that briefcase and you find out if those documents are in there and you get them back, if they're there. And that's what happened. Went to Nashville. She had a room, the way I recall it was she had a room that overlooked the parking lot where her car was parked directly under it. And we were a little bit above. It was like 5 feet off the ground, the room was, a little elevated. And we met in her room, and then they said, let's go in our room, because we're going to, and they diverted her across the hall, down the hall, into their room. And I had slipped a little something in her door so the door wouldn't close behind us as we left her room. And then while we were going down and the guys were piling into the other room, and they sort of blocked out the sun, there were so many of them, and they were so big compared to her, I slipped back out, went back down to her room, opened the door, gave a signal to the private investigator. He ran over. I think the briefcase was in her little Pathfinder. The guy jimmied the lock, because he was also an expert on popping car locks. Pulled the thing out. I'm watching, and I'm going back to the door to the hotel, looking down the hall, make sure she's not coming. And sure enough, she comes storming down the hall towards the room. I run over to the window. I tell the guy, beat it. He runs off with the briefcase. Terry comes into the room and starts interrogating. Marty, what are you doing in my room? What are you doing? You're up to something. You're planting. She was like accusing me of all these stuff, And I'm like, I'm just keeping cool under pressure and whatever. And I'm trying to divert her and saying, I know what you're talking about. And I'm trying to divert her back to the other room so the guy can get the job done. Long and short of it is, the guy goes down to a payphone booth down the street where there's some light, pops the lock, opens it up, sees that what we're looking for is not in there. It's just some personal papers of hers. Comes back and slides the briefcase back in the car, locks it, and takes off. So that's how I accomplished my mission.